Well, we'll get rolling here. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar broadcasting from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin and Urbana, Illinois. I'm Corey Geiger, one of the editors with Hoard's Dairyman. And as you can see on your screen, we're very proud to present this webinar with Ev Thomas and Dr. Mike Hutchins. Ev is one of our two field-to-feed bunk columnists, and he'll be our presenter today. He's going to be talking about the ABCs of alfalfa management. Today's webinar is brought to you by WL Alfalfas. Of course, we'll bring these webinars to you because of the great support from our sponsors. This is our third year we've hosted a webinar on the second Monday of each month, noon Central Time. As long as you subscribe to this webinar here, you'll get an email each Friday before the day so that you'll be reminded of dates and times. Again, our co-host here is Mike Hutchins, while Jim Baltz serves as our webinar producer. Mike will formally introduce Ev and get this webinar off and running. Mike?
Yeah, very good. Corey, good to have you on board here and being part of our webinar series here. Got a great attendance, and I'm very pleased to introduce a professional and personal friend, Ev Thomas. Ev Thomas is no stranger, as you already pointed out. He is very visible all across the United States and in the world at this point. Ev got his bachelor's degree at the University of Connecticut and his master's at Cornell University. We won't hold that against him. Ev has 47 years, so he's probably over 40 years of age, 47 years as an agronomist in northern New York State there, worked at Cornell for a period of time, and of course was well respected from all his research and efforts at the Minard Institute over there at Chazy, New York for a number of years. He, as already Corey pointed out, he is one of the column writers for Hoard's Dairyman. He also does some editorialship with the Farm Report. And if you're not getting the Farm Report either electronically, you really want to get that. It's a tremendously popular publication. Comes out monthly from the Minard Institute. So at this point, Ev, I'll turn it over to you, and we are so pleased to have you online here today. And it's all yours to discussing the ABCs of alfalfa harvest.
Thank you, Mike. It's nice to be here. Of course, when you've been around as long as I am, it's kind of nice to be anywhere. But we're going to be talking about alfalfa management in general and alfalfa harvest in particular. And their topics for today, we're going to be talking about some facts of life for alfalfa, spend a bit of time on mowing height, some of the impacts of mowing height on alfalfa yield and quality, spend some time on windrow management. One of our main areas that we'll be focusing on is on harvest timing, both first and subsequent cuts, also talking about fall management. And I would note that our primary focus is going to be on alfalfa silage, but of course many of the things we talk about as far as alfalfa management will be applicable to alfalfa silage or hay production. And what we're going to do is we're going to start right out with a poll question, and I'll turn it back to Mike.
Very good, Eva. Well, we got to get ready to vote here. Remember, to those of you that are new here, you get a chance. We have several. We have two polls, actually, and you have choices here. What is the most common cause of disease stand decline? That's the question that Eva's asked here. You have four choices. Insect damage, number one. Second of all, weed encroachment, number two. Third, foliar diseases. And the fourth one, crown damage caused by field traffic. Boy, Jim, those are tough. So the polls are now open. You can start voting, and we're off and running. We've got 40% of the vote in already. We must have lots of Democrats or frustrated Republicans. That's all I can say, because my goodness, look at this. We're almost at 2/3. Sometimes we have to beg to get 2/3 of it at this stage of the game. We're at 2/3 of the vote right now. 75. We'll wait for 75%. Or we just lost one. Let's close the poll. Let's go ahead and close the poll. Ev, write this down, and you can discuss this here. It's interesting. The spread is for insect damage 24%, weed encroachment 22%. Foliar disease, 22%. Crown damage caused by field traffic, 32%. So it's almost a quarter. What does that mean, Ev?
Well, it means that people are obviously having variable experiences with the causes of alfalfa decline. And there certainly are a number of reasons, because alfalfa plants do not simply die. I mean, they certainly can be killed by insects. The picture you see on the upper left there is alfalfa leafhoppers. Also diseases, some leaf spot on the upper right, low fertility, the lower right is potassium deficiency, and frost heaving, and simply frigid temperatures can do it. But I think in a lot of cases, even if alfalfa manages to survive these insults, It can be killed by cutting too frequently, cutting at the wrong time, or by field traffic. But of all of these, the one that we absolutely cannot avoid is field traffic. Because every year through the various processes, whether it's mowing, baling, chopping, hauling, manure application, fertilizers, etc., we theoretically run over almost every alfalfa plant in the field at least one time during the year with some heavy piece of equipment. And this can damage the crown and it can expose it to disease. And most of these other causes, insects, diseases, cutting management, they're maybes. But of all of these, the only one that is unavoidable is field traffic. And certainly opinions differ, but I would say that the 32% of the people that voted for the damage that's caused by field traffic would be the one that I would go with, because that is really unavoidable. But just to show you how complex this can be, here's an alfalfa plant. And the cause of this alfalfa plant dying, because you can see it's still alive, would be diagnosed as a crown or a root rot. As you can see, they've split that root there, and it's badly damaged. And isn't it interesting that that plant was damaged a while ago, because it's trying to almost grow two plants. But the primary cause of that alfalfa's problem was not disease. The primary cause of it was being split by field traffic, being damaged by field traffic, and so the disease organism came in as a secondary cause. So yeah, it would be killed by disease, but what was the real cause of that alfalfa plant's problem? It was field traffic. In other words, we killed it, and there was nothing we could really do to completely prevent that. There are some alfalfa varieties that have lower set crowns, and that may help it, but still we're going to be doing some damage by this means. And so it really makes little sense to manage alfalfa with long stand life as the primary goal, especially on dairy farms where forage quality is just so very important. And so what we really need to do is to manage for high quality while maintaining a reasonable harvest interval and following other recommended stand management practices. And in some cases, we have a goal of never seeing a blossom from seeding to plow down. And we'll be talking a little bit about that as we talk about alfalfa management. But again, that kind of summarizes, kind of alfalfa facts of life and death. And the next topic I'd like to discuss is mowing height. How low should we mow? This was a topic that 10 years ago wasn't very commonly asked, but it's a much more common question now. Unlike grasses, alfalfa stores the nutrients for the next crop in its taproot. And so the nutrient storage is below the ground. There's no regrowth from the stubble. If you go out a few days after you mow a field of alfalfa and look at the stubble, you'll see that it's either dead or all but dead. It's browned up or pretty well gray in color. And therefore, alfalfa mowing height has no direct impact on the regrowth rate because the nutrients are going to come from below the ground. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay some attention to mowing height, especially in the northern United States or in Canada. We should be leaving somewhere around 4 to 6 inches of stubble during a fall harvest to help catch and hold the snow, especially if we go in and take that alfalfa off late enough in the fall that there will be little or no regrowth. In a situation like that, it's very important that we leave some kind of a stubble under these cold climates to catch and hold snow. And this isn't just theoretical. I mean, leaving a high alfalfa stubble really does work. We had a case about 15 years ago in northern New York where we had a terrible case of ice sheeting, and we had a lot of damage to fields. And I really think that in some cases the alfalfa came through this ice sheeting as well as it did, because in a lot of cases we had a high stubble that poked through the ice in the low areas, and we got a little bit of transfer of air from down below that ice sheet, so we really didn't get the complete smothering. So this whole idea of leaving a high alfalfa stubble after a fall harvest really is one based on fact and not just on opinion. But on many dairy farms, especially with the high capacity choppers and the multiple trucks that we use to haul forest off of the field, in a lot of cases, mowing becomes the bottleneck in the hay crop silage operation, to the extent that some large farms have one chopper and a couple of mower conditioners. And therefore, when disc mowers came into being, they became very popular because they can be operated at a much higher ground speed than can sickle bar mowers. And if any farmers have alfalfa fields that have any reasonable amount of grass in them, they would know that it makes even more of a difference, because disc binds in alfalfa grass versus sickle bar mowers in alfalfa grass, there's a big difference in mowing speed, sometimes at least twice the speed. And this has all contributed to the rapid switch from sickle bar mowers to disc mowers in much of North America, because sickle bar mowers on the left are slow, and disc binds on the lower right are fast. In some cases, we see these disc binds being operated at darn near road speeds when we look at some of these self-propelled windrowers. And farmers soon realized that not only were disc mowers faster, but they were also more bulletproof than sickle bar mowers. You wang a pretty decent sized rock with a sickle bar mower and you climb off the mower and you have to repair one or more knife sections. Been there, done that. Is something farmers hate to do, have downtime during harvest. But they realized that with a disc bind, unless you hit a really big rock or run into something pretty solid, it doesn't do much or any damage to the disc knives. And so farmers quickly realized that they could start mowing closer to the soil surface. And in some cases, mowing became a dual-purpose operation, combination mowing and land leveling. And we've seen a lot of cases where they were actually taking off part of the soil surface along with their mowing, especially with some of the larger machines and some of the more uneven land. And this has resulted in a problem that prior to the advent and the use of disc mowers was very uncommon. What's that? You probably know what it is. It's ash. And ash is a problem that's been very much in the news over the last 5 or 10 years. In this picture, which was taken last year during the dry conditions we had out in Idaho, you can see the amount of dust and soil that is being and debris that's being stirred up by this disc bind. 2 reasons for more ash potential when you have disc mowers. First, mowing height in a lot of cases has been reduced to as low as 1 inch. And this wasn't just farmer ideas. We had some university agronomists that are saying that there's no reason not to mow as low as you can reasonably go with disc binds because, as I mentioned before, about alfalfa's storage of nutrients below the ground. And the other reason is there's a yield difference. Research has shown, both university research and also 2 years of trials that we did at Minor Institute showed that you'll get about 500 pounds of yield difference per year for every 1 inch change in stubble height, higher or lower. That 500 pounds, of course, it depends on the year, it depends on the height of the alfalfa, it depends on how many times you cut it, but 500 pounds is a pretty good average because we tried it at the Institute, and that's just about where we were, just about 500 pounds. And the other interesting thing is there's not nearly as much impact on forage quality as it may seem. I was really surprised after the 2 years of research we did on looking at a 2 inch versus a 4 inch mowing height on alfalfa that there was this little difference not only in NDF but in fiber digestibility. There was only a point or 2 difference in NDF and in NDF-D between the 2 and the 4 inch, and I just thought there'd be more of a difference than that. And so it looks to me like the increase in yield outweighs the modest decrease in quality on most farms. The other reason that we're getting some more ash with disc mowers, even when they're being operated at a 2 inch stubble height, is that disc mowers create some turbulence by the rotary action. And this increases the chances of surface debris being sucked up and deposited on the windrows. Now here's what's happening, and this isn't research. This is based on tens of thousands of forage analysis done by Dairyman over about a 10 or 12 year period. Now if you take a look over on the left where you have legume and legume grass, you'll see back in 2001 the ash concentration averaged about 10%. And if you were to go back 5 and 10 years before that, you would see it about flatlined right at about 10%. But looking at this graph, can you get an idea of when disc binds became, or disc mowers became popular? Starting soon after 2001 and over the next 5 years or so. By 2007, you can see we picked up 1% to 1.5% of ash. And again, that's based on tens of thousands of samples. So there were real things that were occurring. Why did they go down a bit after 2007? Well, I'll be an optimist and say that it was because a lot of us in the crop industry and in the dairy industry were cautioning farmers to pay attention to ash and to take some steps if ash concentrations got worrisomely high. And so you can see we've come down some, but we're still higher than we were back when we were predominantly using sickle bar mowers. And what isn't mineral content is dirt. Now, most of the ash content of alfalfa and other forage crops is good ash. And if the average ash content of alfalfa silage is 11%, and that's basically based on forage analysis, the mineral content, in other words, the good ash, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, all the minerals that you see that are the nutritive parts of alfalfa, would be about 8%. So that leaves what I will call the dirt difference of 3%. And it's not really dirt, it's soil, it's some old manure solids if you top dress manure on alfalfa fields. It's also some vegetative debris. But I'm not worried about a dirt difference of 3%. But I've seen alfalfa silage samples with 18% ash. And you subtract that 8% mineral content, and that leaves 10% dirt difference. And what that means is for every 10 pounds of alfalfa silage dry matter you feed, you're not really feeding 10 pounds of alfalfa silage. You're feeding 9 pounds of alfalfa and 1 pound of contaminants. And these contaminants can interfere with fermentation. And then in a lot of cases, they're just simply a nutritive dilution. You're simply not feeding as much alfalfa as you think you are. Now, let's not jump the gun and say, well, everybody has a problem, because everybody doesn't. As many times I've said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't make changes unless ash concentrations are high enough to be a potential problem. And I'd say if they're up in the mid-teens, I would certainly be concerned. And if they are up there, why? Are you mowing too close to the ground? Go out there after you mow an alfalfa field. Are you scalping the ground? Are you essentially using your disc mower as a land leveler? Is it a case of over-aggressive raking? In some cases, if we're kicking up a lot of dust when we rake, that's a practice that needs to be adjusted. A simple step that people can take, and one that was recommended by my friend Dan Untersander, University of Wisconsin, is flat versus curved disc mower knives. Flat knives are better, less vacuuming action. I would say when it's time to trade disc mower knives, whether you've had a problem or not, it may be a good idea to buy flat knives rather than the curved disc mower knives. It's an inexpensive and a rather simple either fix or improvement in the situation. Now let's look at windrow management. And we're backing up for just a moment. This slide was pictures taken at the University of Delaware, and it's showing a trial where they're going in with narrow windrows. As you can see, about a 3-foot windrow width, versus on the left of the image, you can see the wide windrows. Now that's not full width. That's probably a 2/3 or 70% mower width. And in a lot of cases with mower conditioners, that's about as good as we can do. We can't get quite 100% of the cutter bar width because of the conditioner. Well, some farmers will say, well, yeah, but I get my alfalfa down to where I want at 35 or 40% dry matter, leaving it in narrow windrows. And since I get it there, why should I worry? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the way that we will get a narrow windrow down to 35 or 40% dry matter, in many cases, is by waiting until that top is almost dry hay dry. And at the same time, the bottom of that windrow is almost at the same dry matter it was when it was mowed. You could say, yeah, but on the average, if it comes up to 35 or 40%, am I okay? Well, I liken that to a farmer with 1 foot in the bucket of ice cold water and his other foot in the bucket of scalding hot water. On the average, he's comfortable, but of course he's not. And that's the same way with alfalfa, because if we were to chop the alfalfa showed in that image that you're looking at right now, in a lot of cases you would notice a lot of dust coming out of the chopper, but that's not dust. that would be pulverized alfalfa leaves that are running about 35% crude protein. And so in a lot of cases, what we're doing when we're letting it get as dry as that is we get a lot of leaf shatter, and by the time that forage gets from windrow to the feed bunk, we've lost quite a little bit of the leaves. Research results in New York State looking at wide swath, 75 to 85% of cutter width versus the narrow windrows 3 feet wide, the first cut alfalfa silage, and this is big stuff, 4 feet high. We got 20% more milk per ton from wide swaths. It was ready to chop in 7 hours, while the narrow windrows took 25 hours to get to that same dry matter. And even with second cut grass, which you would normally think of something as being fairly quick to dry, there's 11% more milk per ton from wide windrows. It's kind of like the low stave in the barrel. The practice or condition that most limits profits or production. 50 years ago, when dairy cows were producing 50 pounds of milk per day, alfalfa that had 16% protein and 50% NDF may well have been acceptable. It just wasn't a big problem. But now with cows that are producing 100 pounds of milk, 50% ND alfalfa becomes a low stave in the barrel. The cows there were many other limitations on production back in the days when cows were producing 50 pounds a day. But with 100 pounds, we have some new staves in the barrel. But when we're looking at alfalfa management, at the impacts of intensifying or increasing alfalfa harvest management, we like to think of behold the turtle who doesn't make progress until it sticks its neck out. Because as we intensify alfalfa management, it is not without risks, but it's risk versus reward in the hayfield. Dairy farmers did not intensify alfalfa management because they wanted to, necessarily, but in many cases because they had to, when alfalfa quality became a low stave in the barrel, either recognized by them, by their dairy nutrition consultant, by their field crop manager, by their crops consultant, by whoever they work with. And this has resulted in changes not only in alfalfa harvest, but in the fall harvest management of alfalfa as well, because it all ties together. But as I said, when we look at the turtle, more intensive harvest management involves risk. There is a yield, quality, stand life trade-off when we look at changes in alfalfa harvest management. So now we're to another poll question, and I'll turn it to Mike.
Very good, Ev. Well, sounds good. We're moving right along here. Here's another chance to vote. Let's see if we go 25, 25, 25, or whatever the number is. The question is, harvesting alfalfa in the mid-bloom to full bloom stage versus full bud stage often results in what? One choice, A, higher forage yield, B, less weed competition, third choice, less plant damage, tricky, or 1 and 2, that's your fourth choice, which would be higher forage yield and less weed competition, or all of the above, which would be higher yield, less weed competition, and less plant damage. So again, polls are open right now, and we are off and running. We've got about 40% of the vote in, Ev, so we're doing quite well here.
Mike, it's pretty clear that people are getting ready to fill out their NCAA brackets with as quick as the polling.
I tell you, Wisconsin looks like they're in trouble, though. That's all I got to say. Illinois is in huge trouble, but Wisconsin, I tell you.
Watch what you're talking about there, Mike. Yeah. We might be same kettle here.
I hear you. Well, we're interesting. One of these are not very popular, Ev. We'll give you the numbers here in just a minute. Let's go ahead. We're at 70% of the vote, and by the way, we do have over 60 people attending. In fact, 81, 77, 81. Big numbers here, Ev. Big numbers. Here we go. Here is your numbers. On the first one, 24%. A quarter of the people said higher forage yields. 11% said less weed competition. A very modest, these must be the Tea Party Republicans, 5% less field damage, 20% said 1 and 2, and 40% said all of the above. Ev, your comments on the vote.
Okay, well, I think the 1 + 2 + 3 has it, and to answer that, let's go to the next slide. This was a very interesting trial done in the Central Valley of California. And it was a research trial where they took the field and they replicated the trials. In other words, they split the field so that we're comparing, I will say, apples to apples. Let's say alfalfa to alfalfa. And they mowed portions of the field at 50 to 100% bloom. And they got 5 cuts per year. That alfalfa, after 3 years, had no weeds. The other alfalfa they mowed in the bud stage, every cut, that gave them 8 to 9 cuts a year because the harvest interval was much less. At the end of 3 years, they had 50% weed cover. And that's because they had fewer alfalfa plants. There was a stand decline. And that was because the bud stage harvest did not permit the full replenishment of root carbohydrates. It caused plant stress. But look at the yields. The mid-bud yield, where they were only cutting it, they were cutting it 8 to 9 times a year. They got 7.9 tons of dry matter per acre. 50 to 100% bloom, they got 10.3 tons of dry matter per acre. More harvests equal less yield. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at the yield per ton, they got about 1 ton per cutting with the 8 or 9 cuts per year versus 2 tons per cutting where they cut it at a 50 to 100% bloom where they cut it 5 tons per year, and so really it has an effect on yield, and harvest management has an effect on weed pressure. It also will have an effect on plant damage because, let's face it, we run over those fields 8 or 9 times a year versus 5 times a year. What impact does that have on the damage to the crowns? So really, intensifying management has impact on all of these. But the key questions for the dairy farmers, you may look at this and say, well, why cut it 8 or 9 times a year when I can cut it fewer times and get more yield? Well, we need to think about what's the primary goal of alfalfa production. And I know Mike is on top of this one. Is it maximum yield and long stand life? Is that our goal? Or is it the most profitable milk production? And I think you know the answer to that one. Put another way, what would be the milk production and financial impact on a dairy farm that has a 25,000 pound herd average if the best alfalfa the farmer now had available was harvested at 50 to 100% bloom? I think you know the answer to that. So let's look at harvest management then and now, kind of getting into the meat of our program. Back then, and I'm talking to 1 to 2 generations ago, probably closer to 2 generations ago, the recommendation in a lot of places was to allow first cut alfalfa to reach 10% bloom. The idea was to have maximum accumulation of nutrients, of carbohydrates, and then harvest it at the 6 to 7 week intervals. And this would result in second and third and maybe in some places even fourth cut alfalfa getting into full bloom before you harvested it, and it would result in alfalfa quality that's simply too low for today's high producing cows. Nowadays, we're harvesting it pre-bloom for at least the first 3 cuttings, more than that in longer season areas. You get out in California where they can cut 8 or 9 times a year, they may be taking almost all their cuts pre-bloom. And bud stage harvest will usually result in at least 1 more harvest per year. Out in California, it resulted in several more harvests per year. And believe it or not, even in far northern New York, 5 cuttings are possible if all the weather conditions go right and if you're making haylage rather than dry hay. So you could get that from stem to silo in a day or slightly more. And so by bud stage harvest, we are in a lot of cases not only changing our harvest management, but we're changing the number of harvests that we're taking over the course of a year, even in northern areas. How are we going about telling about the right time to harvest first cut alfalfa? Well, one of the ways that's been used increasingly over the past 10 years is the peak method, PEAQ. And this was developed at the University of Wisconsin. And what this does is this uses the longest stem in the field and the most mature stem, and these are usually not the same stems. And then you estimate the NDF of first cut alfalfa in a standing crop. It assumes a 1.5 inch stubble height. I will note right at the outset that this is only good for first cut alfalfa. And it's only good for clear alfalfa. If you have alfalfa grass, then the measurements that you could take from the peak method may tell you what the predicted NDF is of the alfalfa, but it will not tell you what the NDF content is of the field because part of that forage will be grass. So it's only for straight alfalfa. And what we can get now for a modest cost is something called a peak stick. And what this allows us to do is to go into the field and first to tell where the maturity of the field is, whether it's full bud, late bud, early bloom, etc. And then what the stage of maturity is depends on what side of the stick you use. And then you simply put the stick down in the field and you take a direct measurement off the correct size of the stick in terms of the height of the tallest alfalfa in the field. And you can see in this picture, it looks like it might be somewhere around 240 would be the forage quality, if you will, of the alfalfa. In other words, the RFV, the relative feed value, would be around 240 of the alfalfa pictured in this picture. And it's a fairly easy method to do. I have some faith in it because many years ago, when they were first looking at this, I participated in some of the research that went into developing the peak stick. We actually went out in the field, we took these measurements with a meter stick or with a yardstick, and we predicted what the quality would be, and then we harvested the alfalfa at a 1.5-inch height, sent it off to the lab for chemical analysis, for wet chemical analysis, to find out what the NDF and what the forage quality actually was. So this is research-based, not just a theory. There's another way to do it, and that's to predict first cut date by growing degree days, also called GDU. You know what growing degree day units are for corn. It's base 50. Most people realize that. But in this case, we're using 41 Fahrenheit. So we simply take the daily max plus the daily minimum, divide by 2 to get the average, then we subtract 41. And that gives us the base 41 GDU for that day. We don't start counting until the daily high reaches 41 for 5 consecutive days, and then we just count for every day. And research has shown that when we get to 700 GDU, we should be right about at the bud stage. Getting closer to 900, it should be in the early bloom. The disadvantage is that it's something that has to be calculated for each locality, because elevation and the proximity to large water bodies can make a big difference in daily growing degree unit accumulation. And it also is only for first cut. In other words, that 700 GDUs to get us up to what would be considered bud stage would only be good for first cut. My 2 cents worth on this, I think for second and later harvests, I really like to use bud stage. Not during the fall, because during cool weather, it can take a long time for alfalfa to reach the bud stage. I've seen cases where we've gone 8 or 9 weeks between third and fourth cut in northern New York, and the alfalfa never did bud up. But I think as we go from first to second and second to third, I think it's really an easy and an effective method to use bud stage for harvest, not the number of days between cuts. Use the bud stage. For first cut, alfalfa height alone is a good predictor for first cut timing, especially where cool conditions result in alfalfa remaining vegetative for a long period of time. I got bitten by this one at Minor Institute some years ago when we were closely watching a field, and it got later and later. We actually got into June, and that alfalfa was not in bloom or was not in the late bud stage. We finally gave up and cut it, and only to find out we probably should have cut it a week before we did, that the quality was considerably lower, and it never did come close to bloom. So height alone is a good predictor, but height is even better when you combine it with some other variables such as growing degree units, like we just mentioned, or calendar date for first cut. An important point, the difference between standing alfalfa and alfalfa silage. That peak stick that we talked about is going to give you your predicted quality of your alfalfa on the stem. But nutrients are lost during harvest and ensiling, even under ideal conditions. You get leaf loss during harvest. You have sugar losses during field drying and fermentation. And if you ever doubt about the leaf loss, go out there after your haying operation, right after your haying operation is complete, whether it's dry hay or alfalfa silage, and look at the ground and look at the amount of alfalfa leaflets that are left on the ground. Now, Dairy One, their forage analysis looks at fresh alfalfa averaging 40% NDF with alfalfa silage at 44%. So what they're saying is between fresh and silage, we're picking up about 4 points of NDF, but that only accounts for fermentation losses. That doesn't account for the losses in mowing it, in windrowing or raking, in chopping, and essentially getting it to the barn. Jerry Cherney at Cornell, he says the ideal alfalfa silage is 45% NDF, which means that the ideal standing alfalfa would be 38. In other words, he's saying that there's about 7 points loss from stem to feed bunk. Okay, let's talk about fall alfalfa harvest. I'm going to focus on harvest schedules. That's our focus for the day. But we need to recognize that the age of stand makes a difference. Younger plants are healthier, and so they will make it through a winter under the same conditions that may kill older plants. Winter hardiness is a factor, so is fall dormancy, and they're not the same thing. Disease resistance, especially something like Phytophthora resistance, can also be a factor. And then there's taproot feeding insects. Clover root curculio, which is fairly widespread in the U.S., and alfalfa snout beetle, a devastating insect which fortunately is not widespread, occurring mostly in parts of New York State. And these certainly can impact winter survival. Soil fertility, especially pH and potassium. A lot of times we refer to potassium as the antifreeze for alfalfa because low contents of potassium in a lot of cases can be a major source of winter kill. And then, of course, there's soil drainage. So there's a lot of factors that impact winter survival. New harvest schedules mean new challenges for fall management. Back in the 1980s and before that, harvest schedules often resulted in no need to even think about fall harvest. You take the first cut to 10% bloom in early June, the second cut 45 days later in the middle of July, the third cut 45 days later in September 1st, and then in a lot of cases we didn't even think about a fall harvest. But with the harvest schedules we have now, where we may be taking them every 30 days, starting in late May, we get 4 cuts off by late August, and then we start thinking a little bit more seriously about should we take that final cut, that September cut, and if so, when should we take it? Prior to the 1980s, there was a recommendation we didn't make any harvest for 4 to 6 weeks prior to a killing frost, variously defined as 24 to 28 Fahrenheit. But in the 1980s, Quebec research found that it was fine to harvest in September as long as there was enough time prior to that fall harvest to get good, adequate carbohydrate replenishment. But again, this depends on how you treated the alfalfa during the year. Jerry Cherney comments that winter damage to alfalfa is an accumulation of insults. And if you've been very intensive in your harvest management during the growing season, you may decide not to take a fall harvest. The Quebec GDU system is one that can be used to tell whether or not it's okay to harvest in the fall. And they say that it's okay to harvest in the fall if there'll be at least 900 of these 41 GDUs between the last 2 harvests, or less than 360. And the reason they use for 360 is there's not a lot of regrowth in less than 360 growing degree days. I'm not real hot on that one. It's too conservative because it was going to take so much time to accumulate 900 GDUs after late summer harvest that in a lot of cases you're looking at a rest period of over 7 weeks before a killing frost, and that would result in no fall harvest in a lot of the U.S. So I think that Quebec system is a little more conservative than I think it needs to be. The current fall harvest recommendations vary widely. Cornell says 6 to 7 weeks interval between the last 2 harvests. Penn State says 45 days, about the same. Michigan State generally follows the Quebec method, whereas the University of Wisconsin has a no-cut period from September until a killing frost. All of these systems assume a healthy stand, though. Disease, low pH, low fertility, poor drainage, all these problems may suggest more conservative fall management. So I would say fall management is only for a healthy, well-management stand. Some of these can be prevented, and it's easier to prevent them than it is to correct them. But is the trip really necessary? Even done right, a fall harvest often results in lower first cut yields the following spring. That's not an opinion. It's based on research, including research done out in the Midwest. Fall-grown alfalfa often looks a lot better than it really is, because it has large leaflets, often a quarter in size. The farmers looking back at the resulting windrow said, you know, where's the beef? I mean, the field looked a lot better coming into it than it did after he started mowing it. You need to balance the cost and risk of fall harvest on the need for the forage. Leaving a ton of dry matter in the field is not going to smother the plants. It'll probably increase the NDF by about 1%. That's based on some work that was done at Purdue. And that's what in a lot of cases we see. Some plants that are still standing, but a lot of them have fallen down and are not going to be a significant part of next year's first cutting. You should use a silage inoculant. Wild fermentation bacteria populations decline due to frost and prolonged cool weather, so I really think an inoculation is good. But the other thing is that you get this really high protein, and I've seen over 25% crude protein, plus low temperatures and limited fermentation bacteria. In a lot of cases, it makes it really tough stuff to ferment, and that can cause some possible intake problems. We at Minor Institute, we blend our fall harvested alfalfa grass silage with some summer harvested alfalfa grass silage just to try to overcome some of these problems. I'm not a real big fan of very late fall harvested alfalfa. So summing things up, quality trumps quantity, even if it involves some additional risk. Remember the turtle. Milk per ton is more important than milk per acre. Because we can acquire some forages to make up a slight deficiency in yield. But once you have alfalfa in the barn or in the silo, there's nothing you can do to improve the quality of it. We need to adjust our mowing height to field conditions and ash concentration. Be reasonable, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the other thing is, fall harvest decisions are influenced in a lot of cases. They're influenced by recent growing conditions as well as by prior harvest management and how badly the forage is needed. And with that, I will turn it back to Mike.
Okie doke, we're back. We don't see your pretty picture yet here, Ev, at this point.
Oh, there we are. Oh, okay.
What is this picture of, by the way?
Actually, that's what I see when I stand on my front lawn and look out at the St. Lawrence River. And it's one of the reasons why I'm very much looking forward to move back north for the year in 2 weeks. That's the St. Lawrence River, and you're looking across 6,000 feet across into Canada.
Wow, very nice, very nice, very nice. Well, let's go to the next PowerPoint if you can. And Corey, we'll turn this back to you to kind of cover this one, if you would, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, our next webinars are going to be coming up again. They're always the second Monday of each month at noon, and now we're on Central Daylight Time. April 8th, we'll have Mike Hutchins talking about reviewing forage and feed costs, what's fair. And that one will be sponsored by Kemen. And on May 13th, from the University of Wisconsin School of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. Nigel Cook will be talking about no more lame excuses. And that webinar will be sponsored by ZenPro.
Okay, let's go ahead and click up once more, Ev, if you can, and we certainly want to thank our sponsors, because without sponsors, there is no program, or there'd have to be a cost for the program. So certainly, we want to thank LW Alfalfa, WL. Let's get it right, Mike. WL. We should get this right, Corey. I guess I always get in big trouble here.
More of them, yeah. Be sure to check out their website at www.wlresearch.com. But certainly alfalfa being a staple of our dairy cow rations and a very important component.
Well, very good, Ev. Excellent job here. You were about 84, 85 at the peak, so we're doing well. We have questions here for you as well, so strap on your hat, and here we go. They usually keep coming in at this point. First question: Does cutting closer to the ground automatically mean more ash, or can good management prevent this increase in ash content?
I would say that you have to define cutting closer to the ground. I would say that if you were looking at 4 inches versus 2 inches, then cutting to the ground would not appreciably increase ash. We did the research at the Institute, and it was field scale as well as small plots. And looking at 4 inches versus 2 inches, and this was with a disc mower, we did not see an increase in ash as we went from 4 inches to 2 inches. As you go from 2 inches down to 1 inch, I have no data to support this, But I would think it would be a function of, number one, whether you had straight or curved knives, number one, and number two, what the soil moisture conditions were. If soil moisture conditions were fairly moist, I would say the chances of picking up additional ash would be much less than if conditions were like that unfortunate picture we saw in Idaho, where it was a cloud of dust and Ohio silver. So I think it depends on whether we go from 4 to 2 inches or from 2 inches down to 1 inch.
Very good. Another question, Scary. In your opinion, how's that for a setup? Do we fertilize our hay fields enough for optimum yield and quality, in your opinion, Ev?
I think the challenge we have more than anything else is currently potassium, because potassium fertilizers over the last few years have been so expensive that a lot of farmers have decreased the rate of potassium they have been applying. And alfalfa has a tremendous need for potassium. And so I think that there's been a tendency for that more in the last few years than before that. The other problem I see coming, and there's been some really good research in the Midwest, the northern Midwest, to show this, is sulfur fertilization. Since we've pretty well cleaned up the air and are getting much less atmospheric sulfur, particulate sulfur being dumped on us for free, farmers are going to have to start using sulfur fertilizer and have that as a fairly regular part of their fertilization program. In some cases, alfalfa may actually be using more sulfur than it even does phosphorus. And so I think we need to be aware of this. But I think the major challenge at this point in time is making sure that even with higher potassium fertilizer prices, we get enough potassium on this crop.
Very good. Now, you're going to have to answer quicker because for every answer you give, you get 3 more questions. So here we go. What about the PEAQ stick in 3rd and 4th cuttings? Can we use it for that? Can we use it at that point, Ev?
That's an easy question. Nope.
Okay, you didn't gain any on that one. Next one. What kind of forage inoculant do you recommend for alfalfa grass? I'm sure we're here. Bacteria enzymes, Buchneri, and any feels for the type of inoculant for that crop?
I like the Buchneris for corn silage and for other high sugar silages. I don't think that the extra cost of the Buchneri products is justified for alfalfa silage. My personal opinion is we should be using a bacterial inoculant on every ton every year. I don't mind an inoculant enzyme combination as long as they are competitively priced. My priority is number one, getting a high quality bacterial inoculant, preferably Lactobacillus plantarum based, although there's other good ones out there. And in choosing one, get one that is research based.
Okay, speaking of sugar, you didn't touch on the AM/PM cutting. Any thoughts on cutting based on sugar content?
Sure. There's no question that alfalfa has higher sugar when it is harvested late in the day, especially if it's been a sunny day, than harvested in the morning. It's a diurnal pattern, highest late in the afternoon, lowest early in the morning. And there's good research to show that if you're making dry hay, that you may get slightly higher quality by mowing in the afternoon versus the morning. But with haylage, and we've done some research on this at the Institute, the problem with mowing late in the afternoon is that in a lot of cases it's going to take additional hours before you get that alfalfa off of the field. And if you can mow early in the morning and chop in the afternoon, so you're making haylage in the day, I would prefer that to mowing late in the day and having to go through the night, even though there's a difference in sugar. So it's more of an opportunity for dry hay than for haylage.
Okay, another question, is seeding on time more important than seeding rates to optimize yields? He said, we know he didn't cover that, but he sure would like to know what your opinion is on that one.
I have seen seeding rates, I have seen mistakes made with seeding rates made on time where half as much seed went on as the farmer expected, and he wound up with a wonderful stand. And if you take a look at how many alfalfa seeds we plant per square foot, it is way, way in excess of what we need for a full stand of 10 plants or so per square foot. So I think timing is more important than rate. You get the timing right, and you will get much better germination, early growth, competition with weeds, things like this. So I think timing beats rate within reason. When we're looking at reasonable differences in seeding rate.
And what is your seeding rate guideline? Do you have one?
For straight alfalfa, somewhere 14 to 18 pounds of alfalfa per acre. Again, that depends on the germination content of the alfalfa.
Any grass going in there?
My preference is for grass. We typically will plant 12 to 14 pounds of alfalfa and about 4 pounds of grass. I'm a big proponent of grass, especially in the Northeast where we have such highly variable soil types.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yep. Any research been done with bale accumulators dumping at one end of the field versus picking up all over the field as it relates to compaction? Can we justify the cost and the benefit of a better stand by having a compactor?
It's a good question, but to be honest with you, I have not seen any data on that, and I don't even have an opinion on that. That doesn't mean it's a good question. It's just I don't have a good answer.
Okay. Can you get regrowth of the alfalfa plant before you cut a late bloom crop? Understand? In other words, will the third cutting, will it come through the second cutting regrowth if you're too late cutting the initial stand?
You will get a small amount of regrowth, but not a lot. You would have to be exceedingly late and essentially have the stuff almost go to seed before you get a significant amount. We see that a lot with grasses, where we'll have a second crop of grasses coming up through it, but we see that much less with alfalfa.
What's your opinion on manure spreading on alfalfa during the growing season?
I think as long as it is done very soon after the first crop has been taken off with very little regrowth, or whatever crop it is, very little regrowth, I think that's a good practice, especially if you have equipment that will spread a fairly wide pattern, and so you minimize field traffic. In a lot of cases, we're spreading 50 to 70 foot pattern, and I don't like to see it on new seedings. But as we get into second and third year alfalfa, I think it's an excellent practice, and it's a really good way to get to use some summer manure, so that we're not under the risk of having it applied all in the fall. So yeah, I like it, and I will say that we do it every year on almost every field except first year seedings at the Institute.
After every cutting, or after you?
For grasses, we'll a lot of times use it after every cutting, but with alfalfa, we will try to put one application per year, occasionally two. Excellent. It depends. Frankly, it depends as much as anything else on where the level is in our manure pit.
Excellent. You're gaining ground. Trust me, you're answering faster than they're coming in. With disc mowers, we see 2 or 3 day slower regrowth over a sickle mower. Is that typical, or what's your opinion?
Some people have said that with grasses because of the way that the disc mower works in terms of shredding that stem versus nipping it off. Again, boy, I don't know of any data anywhere that's been done on that. But with alfalfa, I just cannot come up with a reason why that would occur if both are being cut at the same height, and where you're not actually doing crown damage by actually hitting the crown with the disc mower. Because again, the regrowth comes from the root system, another from the taproot, I should say, not from the cut stem. So I can't understand why that would happen.
A different kind of question, with kernel processing at corn silage, is there any benefit to consider that with alfalfa?
Oh, you mean running it through
through
rollers?
A plant processor, much like the.
Well, there's been some work done in the Midwest with USDA. ARS did some work on macerating alfalfa, where you are doing a better job of splitting up, of crushing those plant cells and all. But I don't know if anything on a recent basis has been done looking at that. I actually think you can make a good case for not processing alfalfa at all, of just taking it and running it right back onto the ground without conditioning at all, because then you get more of the loss of moisture that actually goes through the leaves rather than exiting through the cracked stem. And so I guess I wouldn't be a big fan of that. Not aware of any work that's actively being done on it. But as long as you're making haylage out of it and putting it into a wide windrow, I'm not convinced that even conditioning is necessary.
Okay. The key word there, Mike, for haylage, because if you're making baled hay, as Ev is alluding to, you wouldn't want to do that.
That's exactly right. If you're making dry hay, you definitely would want to condition the crop. Absolutely. But there's been research done in a couple of locations with alfalfa made for haylage and wide swathing, and that's necessary, and wide swathing, that they have gotten the same rate of drying, or the same total rate of drying over like an 8-hour period with no conditioning as they did with conditioning. Actually, the unconditioned alfalfa was 2 points drier than the conditioned alfalfa, and this was the straight alfalfa.
Your opinion on baleage versus haylage? Any thoughts on that?
I really like baleage for medium-sized and small herds. You get a little bit more variation from bale to bale than you would coming out of an ag bag, or silage bag, or a bunker silo, because you're putting a relatively small portion of the field in each bag. And so I think that careful sampling is necessary, and it certainly works better if you have uniform fields and do a fairly uniform fields and do a very good job of labeling each bag so you know where each one came from. I've seen some wonderful quality haylage coming out of bagged haylage, and as long as it's managed right, I think it's a very good process, or a very good practice, and a very good management system that works really well for mid-sized herds.
How many acres should more knives last? Is that a fair question?
You tell me how many rocks the guy's going to hit and what the ash content of the forage is. I might be able to come up with a little bit better, but there is not any finite answer on that. It's one of those classic "it depends."
Okay, we have 2 questions left, and we're running up against our timeline here. First of all, is there any apps out there that will tell you or request the time you should start cutting alfalfa or corn, that lists GDUs, looking like smartphones, like we have an iPhone where you can call somebody up in New York and says, we are at the point?
Don't know of any. I'm a fairly recent adopter of a smartphone. It's still much smarter than I am, probably always will be. I don't know of any apps out there. That doesn't mean they don't exist. It means that I don't know of any.
Okay. Can a good rake do as good a job as a merger, or is the merger always going to win?
I'll answer that by saying that we sold the rake that we had at Minor Institute and bought a merger. We didn't like the way it behaved, so we bought another merger. We liked the way that behaved. We have used one ever since. I think for the business that we're in, which is making no dry hay at all, 100% silage crops, I much prefer a merger. We're very happy with the job it does. But you have to understand that we had a variety of people that were doing our raking for us, and raking is a little bit of an art. And we just were not happy enough with the quality of the job of raking that we were doing, which was the reason we went to a merger. But I'm a big fan of mergers. I think they have some advantages over rakes.
Okay, just a comment, Ed, maybe you don't need to respond to it, but it ties right into it. This gentleman or this person online said we've had that 18% ash. We could see the sand, like somebody went out there with a salt shaker, put it on there. The wheel rake was the big culprit. We tried to do with disbine with a merger, and that solved the ash problem, but now we have a drying problem using the merger. Is merger still the answer?
I'm not sure why they have a drying problem. I would say if they have a drying problem, they might want to go out there very gently with a tedder and possibly stir things up with a tedder very soon after they mow. I would question, whether they are getting the 70-75% of the mower width of that swath that's laying out there. If it's not drying wide enough, my temptation would be to do something necessary so that the width is so it's wider. Whether that means going to a disc mower without a conditioner, or whether it means going in and messing around with that windrow to spread it out a little further, that would depend on the individual.
What's your take on tethering, and when would you tether?
You mean tedding?
Tedding, yes.
Tedding, not tethering. Tedding. Again,
Tether would be tying up. I'm sorry.
we have used it, and I think properly done, operated at a fairly slow speed so that you're distributing rather than flinging that forage all over the place, and done very soon after mowing. You don't want those leaves to have dried out when you go into ted. Very soon after mowing, I think it can be a good practice. I'm not sure that it's one that needs to be done all the time. Possibly first cut more than second or third.
When is the best time? The last question, and then we'll let you have a break. When is the best time to merge rows?
I think I just answered that question. Okay, merging. I'm sorry, not tedding. Merging. Fairly soon before chopping. I can tell you that at Minor Institute, if we're in a 20-acre field, we will have the merger in one end of the field and the chopper in the other end of the field.
And what moisture would that be at? Would you estimate?
35 to 40% dry matter is what we're aiming at.
Okay. Last question. What about baleage? You want that same number for baleage when you're baling the bales? How wet or dry do you want the baleage?
I think you can go a little drier with baleage. I would not be at all uncomfortable with 40-45% dry matter on baleage.
Excellent.
I've seen some wonderful baleage made at those dry matters.
Well, Ev Thomas, you've done a yeoman's job here. We just probably a record number of questions we got through here, and you really can bang them off very good. We want to thank you very much for your dedication and great program. I'm going to turn the program back to Corey to wrap it up, and hopefully we'll see you all back here in April.
Thank you very much, Mike, and Ev, really wonderful job. This webinar might have even surpassed the high quality of your the feed bump columns, and that's pretty high water to do. Also, Mike, you're welcome. Also, thanks to Mike, our co-host, and Jim Baltz, who does all the work to produce these webinars. He does a wonderful job. Again, we'd also like to thank WL Alfalfas for their sponsorship, for bringing this webinar and making it possible today. If you'd like to learn more about WL Alfalfas, go to their website at www.wlresearch.com. You can check out this webinar in a few days and all the past 28 webinars in addition to this one at our archives at www.hoards.com/webinars, or also just find it on the upper right-hand corner of our website. Also, shortly in a few days, you'll be receiving a 7-question survey about this webinar. And I know if you missed a webinar, check out the archives. We're just 105 views shy of 20,000 over the past 2 years, which is quite remarkable and says good things about our presenters, especially Evan Mike. So with that, we thank you for attending today, and we'll see you on April 8th when Mike talks about reviewing forage and feed costs, what's fair.